we could solve like all the problems of wealth inequality and all of this by taxing excess wealth. But of course, it's very difficult to quantify because people have got those kind of assets. It's like, well, how do you even begin to audit this? The argument against it is, well, I'd have to sell my assets. That's unfair. You're taking my...
That's such bullshit.
You're about to listen to a conversation at the precipice of reality and understanding. I am John Patrick Morgan, and this is the Gatekeepers Podcast.
Hi, James.
Hello, John.
Welcome to episode 1 of Gatekeepers.
Fantastic.
The new podcast. Yeah. And the subtitle of this podcast is Conversations at the Precipice of Reality and Understanding.
Okay.
Do you remember where I came up with the name? Or when and where?
From
I told you before.
Gatekeepers.
Yeah. Do you remember where the name came to me? Do you remember me telling you about it?
Yeah, I think I do, but go on, you can tell me again.
It was in a mushroom trip.
Right.
I came out of that mushroom trip being like, dude, this is the name. I've got to create a podcast. It's got to be this. It was so clear. This is like over a year ago.
Yeah.
But I was reflecting on it, remembering in prep for today. And I was remembering that in that journey, mushroom journey, I did a 5-gram psilocybin journey by myself, and it was a lot. It was a little too much. It was intense. I was a newbie. And I just there were like these certain people who came to me in that journey of people that already knew about this other side of reality that had been like gently nudging me in that direction of possibility all along. And I was like, these people are the gatekeepers.
Right.
And you were one of them. Kalpna was one, my wife, and there were some others. And then, I don't know, as the journey started to like lighten up, and this term gatekeepers was staying with me as like, I don't know why, it just became clear as a conversation that I could be having as a podcast. And then once I started to see that, still on the journey, still in that kind of, that subliminal space. And then the tagline came to me, Conversations at the Precipice of Reality and Understanding. And at that time, I thought it meant, conversations about like this other world that's like always been there that I wasn't accessing.
Yeah.
But since then, I realized that like, actually, I think the term, and your face came to mind when it came to me, is because the term gatekeeper is actually a term you gave to me probably like 9 or 10 years ago, back when I lived in London. Do you remember using that term in a different context?
I do, yeah. Because I used to have this gatekeeper theory, right? I used to call it my gatekeeper
this is where it came
theory.
from.
Right.
Yeah.
So the gatekeeper theory is just quite simply this, is that we inhabit the world that we know, like 100%. Whatever we grow up with is normal, okay? So if you grow up in complete poverty or something like that, you're in a working class, poverty, whatever, that's what you know. That is reality.
Yeah.
And the other worlds that exist out there, you might know about them. You may have read about them. You may have watched movies about them, but they're not real. They're fictions, right? And you can't operate in those worlds.
Right.
Yeah, for you, they're fictions.
Right.
So, like, it doesn't matter what you do. You can't imagine what it's like to be in that world. You don't have the presuppositions that help you make sense of that world. So it's a fiction. So, like, let's say I come from a working class background and my parents are market traders or something like that. Like somebody who works, say, as a trader in the city of London or in, in New York or something, in Wall Street. If I read about that, that's a fantasy. It doesn't mean anything to me, right? It's an unreal thing.
Yeah, it's just as real as a fairy tale you might read in a book. It's
Exactly.
like a different world.
I may as well be reading Lord of the Rings, right? I can go and I can appreciate it, I can enjoy it, but that's not real. So my theory around gatekeepers, and this came from reflecting on my own life, is that it's only when you meet somebody that actually shows you this other world, right? They take you through the portal to this other world and you go, oh, look at that. Like people actually do this and live this way and then at that point, my own experience is I would never really get that, oh, I could do this. I could be this. I could have this. It was only when somebody took me through the portal, so I would think back and think about, the different kind of portals I'd gone through and who were the gatekeepers for me. Yeah. So that's all it really was.
Yeah,
it's just
that's what I remembered as well.
Yeah.
And I remember us talking about it when I had discovered this kind of high fee life coaching world.
Right.
With Rich Litvin and Steve Chandler, with their book, when they were writing the book, The Prosperous Coach. And you and I went to this event. And it was like, we knew what coaching was. We were helping people and getting paid for it, but it was way different, a couple £100 an hour per session. And these guys were charging $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 paid up front.
Yeah.
And that was like Lord of the Rings. It was like, what is this? And then I remember talking about we went time and spent time in that world, and we realized, oh, it's just being in this world, hanging out in this world, and learning how to emulate almost this language system that this being lives in.
Yeah. Yeah. Robert Keegan talks about that. He talks about different language cultures. I think they're kind of like concept cultures or idea cultures, whatever, but like, it's just culture really.
Yeah.
You hang out in one culture and you hang out in the conceptual system of that culture, and then that shapes what you see and what you're able to perceive. And you go into a different culture and you hang out in the perceptual system of that culture. It's like, whoa, everything's really different here. I remember that for that event particularly.
Yeah.
Because for me, I'd come from this kind of NLP hypnosis culture, which had a particular way of seeing the world. And it's kind of aligned with that stuff that Rich and Steve were orchestrating.
It's transformation, right?
Yeah.
It's transformation. So it's aligned in that way.
Right. But the whole conceptual system, the underlying conceptual system was quite different.
Yeah.
That's why it was really good for me. I got a lot of value from it. You were already in that though, weren't you? Like you say, we went to that
I
event.
had been talking with Rich, and I had been doing some work with him a little bit. So it wasn't my first exposure to it, but it was certainly being in a physical room with multiple people that were in that idea. So it was still, and still hadn't impressed upon me that higher possibility. But so since this, a year and a half ago, whenever, and I had this psychedelic insight of gatekeepers, and, then contemplating it and thinking about doing the podcast, but bringing it through the lens of more clear and grounded thought from normal reality and reflecting on that, your use of the term, I was thinking like, actually, this is really meaningful for me, because that is how I really attack life. Is I look to, whenever I want to learn something new or getting to a new industry, like just prior to meeting you, I was getting into performance magic, mentalism, psychological magic. And that's how we ended up connecting. But I'm like, who are I never had that term, but who are the gatekeepers? Who are the people that are the access points, like the nodes in the network, the most connected and the most knowledgeable? And how can I get as close as I can to them and spend as much time around them and just emulate their way of thinking and being? And so because that's now realizing like actually seeking out and being in conversation with gatekeepers has always been my orientation as an access point to mastery or to a new industry or to a new world. I was like, this is the right name for the podcast. It's not necessarily about like going beyond reality in the sense of the esoteric. Even though that's an interest of mine, or like, psychedelics is certainly not about that, but it is about like these different phenomenological worlds and accessing them through being in conversation with people who are highly connected into them and very schooled in and have an embodied understanding of those worlds.
Right. I think it also tracks back though to what you're talking about there, saying having an interest in esoteric things or spiritual things or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you might meet somebody who has an entirely different operating system from you. When I say operating system, I often use that term to mean now kind of like underlying conceptual system, our way of making sense of things.
Yeah.
They have a completely different operating system when it comes to how the world works at a fundamental level, at like a real deep level. And that can be so enlightening to connect into somebody who's got I don't want to grade it, but let's say a richer operating system than you have.
Sure.
That's able to see more and perhaps see more deeply because of the way they conceptualize. That's incredibly valuable. And that's Robert Keegan's point, because Robert Keegan's a developmental psychologist. He says one of the most powerful things about therapy for people is they get to hang out in a different, he calls it language culture, but I would say they get to hang out in a different conceptual system. Which is they're not going to get hanging out with their regular friends and family. They're just going to get more of what they've already got.
And the other thing that does, we're going to riff on Keegan quite a bit here right now, is it gets you in over your head. And that speaks to the rest of the tagline, conversations at the precipice of reality and understanding. So what I mean by that is, and what the podcast is about and these conversations are about, is like, I'm interested in being in conversations that take me to the edge of the world that I know and understand, and to lean into that. And also with people, I'm interested in being in conversation with people when they're at their edge, when we're both trying to figure out and are at the edges of our two worlds, of our own worlds, and dancing at that edge. It's kind of like the Fool, right? Like at the edge of the cliff. And because being in that space, I think is like, well, I certainly love being in that space. I love the discomfort of that, but I think that's the key to growth. Always seeking that and leaning into that edge.
Well, it's only when you're at the edge that you can go beyond.
Right.
There's no other way. I'm thinking, just as you're saying that, I've got those ancient maps that used to sort of like have the known world, and then outside that was there be dragons, on the map. The sea monsters were outside of the known world. This sort of warning, don't go there. It's bad. I think a lot of people have that. They sort of settle into their certainties, and they don't want to go to the edge of them. They want to kind of hang out within their certainties. And there's a certain safety in that, maybe. I don't know, sometimes.
Well, absolutely there is, man. I mean, of course there is. I don't think that just because it's safer to stay in your known world doesn't mean you shouldn't face those monsters, but I have like pulled back on my use of psychedelics because going so deep, so hard, and having the kind of mind that's so willing to ask myself questions that unravel my sense of existence. Like I can see the danger in it. I've tasted the edge of like psychosis. Like I know that I have gone to a point where if I kept going in that direction, I might not come back. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I would always come back. Maybe once the mushrooms wore off, it's like you always come back and you're fine. But certainly there are people that have had psychedelic experiences that have gone so far that they haven't come back.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a real thing. So whether it's through psychedelics or through inquiry, or through just, trying on different ways of being that go so far outside the bounds of what's appropriate and accepted, you put things at risk, either psychologically or socially, right? And going outside the bounds of a relationship, like a marriage or something like that, you go too far, you break it. So safety is, it's a real thing. And I think it's something worth both. I think the more that you acknowledge it consciously, actually for me, the more courage it gives me to lean into the edge, because then I'm not unconsciously afraid of the edge. I'm facing it with my eyes wide open.
Right. Yeah. That kind of makes sense. I was talking to someone yesterday about how fear actually comes from certainty, not from uncertainty.
Say more about that.
Right. In that, like, now I'm not saying this is true, but I'm a change work guy, so I often tell people things that I think is useful
that are backwards,
to tell them.
Just to shake them up.
Right. I'm messing and stuff like that. But, the idea that I was sharing there is there was a certainty, particularly with this person, a certainty that they couldn't handle unpredictable things. Right. So for me, there was a certainty that was absolutely bad if that happens, and I won't be able to handle it. Those were the certainties that were limiting them. Right. Whereas like you can go, yeah, there's probably dragons out there, but you know what? I'm going to handle them.
I'm going to handle it.
Right. I'm going to meet those dragons. I'm going to have my lance in hand, and you might be wrong. That's the thing. There is no, this is one of the things I often say to people when they're looking at really engaging in a process of self-transformation or whatever. There's risk involved. There is risk involved. Like you're talking about, you could lose your, your
sanity,
mind.
Your relationship, your life. You could lose things.
Right. So there's risk involved in going out. There be dragons. But in the end, there's a line that I got from the founder of the Sedona method, whose name is escaping me at the moment, which is, would you rather be safe or free? I don't know. It's probably a false dichotomy, but again, change agents, they like.
Yeah, I like the choice.
Yeah.
I think it confronts us with, we talked about that before, and I think it's like, I think if a person is willing to ask themselves that more often, then they're going to create more courage, and that a lot of our seeking of safety is unconscious. That's what I was saying about when I could acknowledge that it is safer to stay, I am often more likely to go. It's when I'm unconsciously staying out of a sense of a fear of not being safe, that I'm being safe out of habit. But if I could see it, and that's what I was doing, I would make the choice. Not always, but more often. Yeah. So I want to shift topics a little bit. And the way I want to do it is just ask you a question based on this idea for the podcast, which is conversations at the precipice of understanding and reality. And the question is, because we haven't talked in a couple of weeks, you and I are good friends, we talk often, but it's been a couple of weeks. So I'm interested in, what are you trying to figure out right now? Like, what are you working to understand in your own world?
You know, I'm just going to say the first thing that comes up, and I don't know if this is 100% it, but I think I mentioned this to you before, but I've been doing this deep dive into 19th century texts and manuals and instruction manuals on animal magnetism, mesmerism, and looking at the evolutions of hypnosis from that and what those people were doing at that time and how those people were thinking. And those people, one of the books, I just mentioned one of the books that I've read that I've absolutely loved, which is Hypnotism and the Doctors, Volume 2, by a guy called Richard Hart. And now, the reason it's called Hypnotism and the Doctors is because most of the people who were doing hypnotism and driving it forward during that time were doctors. And there was a big, there was a lot of infighting because most of the medical profession were 100% against it. They're like, this is quackery. We don't want anything to do with it. Whilst they're doing all sorts of crazy things like bleeding people and giving them mercury and all of this and saying that hypnotism, that mesmerism is bad. But you get these pioneers, and a lot of them actually came into it from quite a skeptical place. Right? They came in with skepticism and they start exploring with it, and they don't know what it is. That's the thing. They don't know what it is. They don't know how it works. So they're actually conducting mostly experiments. They're not like a lot of hypnotists that I know these days that go, I just want to learn a high level of skill. And they have a lot of certainties about how it works and what's possible. These lot had no idea. So they're really exploring, what could be done. And I'll give one example of someone I find particularly interesting. This is James Esdale, the Scottish surgeon, who went off and got a contract to go and work in a hospital in India in around about 1850-ish. And he was there for 2 years. It was a 2-year contract. He was doing a lot of surgeries. This is pre-anesthetic, pre-chloroform, pre any kind of chemical anesthesias, only just pre that by a few years. And he was operating on this young Indian man who was in a lot of pain because he's having a serious operation done. And Esdale happens to have read in the newspaper about a guy called John Elliotson and him doing some mesmerism demonstrations. And he turns to his assistant and says, do you know anything about mesmerism? And he says, I've seen it demonstrated once and it didn't work. And Esdale says, well, I have a mind to try it now. And he does this. He does this piece of mesmerism. And about half an hour in, he's thinking nothing's happening. He gives up. And the guy who he's doing the mesmerism on opens his eyes and says through a translator, why is there smoke in the room? So Esdale continued with the mesmerism. And 15 minutes later, this guy was completely placid, non-responsive to the operation, to the pain. Esdale went on to do over 300 major operations and over 1,000 minor operations under mesmeric influence. And he documented it all. He got witnesses. It was a very rigorous piece of work. But the thing that I love about this is the fact that he didn't have to go and train to do it or learn. He just went and had a go. He just went and did it. Now, he came to the conclusion later on, he really was a believer in the idea that belief didn't matter. So a lot of people who believed that mesmerism was about suggestion, they were into this idea that if people believed it, then it would work for them like a placebo effect. But he said that most of the people he was mesmerizing were already in delirious states. Half of them didn't know he was even there. So he didn't believe in the rapport theory that you needed to be in rapport. He was a true believer in something other than it just being about suggestion and rapport and all of this kind of thing.
I don't even know. Mesmerism, does it include talking like hypnosis does?
Well, like the interesting thing about the old school original mesmerists, they used to do most of it in silence.
So what are they doing? Are they doing some kind of movement?
Like a classic. So the idea of mesmerism, or animal magnetism as it was called in Europe, it's only in the UK at the time it was called mesmerism. I don't know about the States, but in the UK it was called mesmerism. The belief is, amongst the original mesmerists, there's some unseen, like, magnetic fluid, they thought it was. This is just an equivalent of vital force, chi, prana, whatever you want to call it, right? And they believed, and this started with Mesmer in the 1700s, that they could influence this, that people exuded it, and you could influence other people through doing it. So most of the original mesmeric work was conducted either with what's called fascination or eye fixation. So they'd look in, the classic look into my eye. But they would often, like a classic way of doing this might be, I think this is like La Fontaine's method. He would sit in front of the person. They would look right at him. He'd have their knees between his, and he would take hold of their thumbs. So his thumbs were pressing their thumbs, and he would look right in the eye and will them to basically sleep or drop into a mesmeric trance. And then when their eyes would close, he would make passes down the body, almost like a chi healer would, just affecting the system. Now, this is the way the classic mesmerists did it. They didn't use verbal suggestion.
Yeah, very interesting, and it worked. That was this doctor did 1,300 of these operations, major and minor, with that method.
Yeah, with this method
without suggestion.
He's not even doing the eye fixation. He's doing mesmeric passes.
Wow.
Right now, there's an argument that says it's still a suggestion because he's still doing something, and there's a perception that what's being done is going to have an effect. And some people have pointed out, and Esdale himself acknowledged this, that his method was similar to the sort of local fakirs method of I think they called it Jarfunk. I don't know what that translates as. But it could be argued that there's still suggestion at play because these people have seen the fakirs doing stuff like this. They buy into that. They see Esdale doing a similar thing. Esdale's got a massive amount of prestige in their eyes because he's a surgeon. One of the quote unquote colonial masters, So he's got all of this, if you look at the prestige faith dynamic, that could be working in his favor. It doesn't rule out suggestion, but it's interesting that he wasn't tilting it with suggestion. Now, Esdale's theory was that belief wasn't important, right? But that disbelief or skepticism or cynicism would get in the way of the process. So you didn't need to get buy-in and evoke belief in what you were doing. You just needed people to not believe. I.e., if they remained in an open-minded place, then the effect could be had.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that like a couple weeks ago, that part of it, because I was sharing about how I was fascinated by how when I stopped trying to believe in magic and I stopped trying to cultivate faith in something greater than me and instead focused on letting go of not believing, this faith and this belief in magic just kind of emerged on its own. It just filled up the space. And I likened the experience it's just like life. Like life just grows when you just don't inhibit it. A seed will grow when it's just given water and sunlight on its own. But I'm curious too, you've been diving this, what's the edge of your curiosity right now? What are you trying to figure out, or what are you still wanting to know about, or what are you experimenting with?
Well, with regard to that, I mean, I'm largely known as a hypnotist by a lot of people. Okay. Now, and I've got a book on hypnotism, which I'm not plugging here, but I don't mind if people go and buy it.
Plug it, dude.
Which is Hypnosis Without Trance, How Hypnosis Really Works. Now, listen to that as a subtitle. Now, I'm not so arrogant as to believe, this is the correct way. That's a subtitle to sell the book, right? But it does have a framework for how hypnosis
Very hypnotic.
Works. Yeah, and at the time that I came up with the ideas that are in that book, I had done a lot to sort of figure out hypnosis in a way that made sense to me. And that way of making sense to me happened to be very useful for a lot of other people learning to do hypnotism. But I got to a point where I go, right, this is kind of boring now that I'm so certain about how it works. Oh yeah, it doesn't work like that, it works like that. So there's a lot of things that I would sort of rule out as being fanciful or whatever. And I've always stuck very clearly to the things I know I can do and I can deliver in a change work context, instead of going, do you know what? Bring anything. Now, these early mesmerists and early hypnotists, because the term, the hypnotism thing, suggestion thing emerged slowly and became more dominant in the later half of the 19th century, and the magnetism model sort of dropped away. But nonetheless, whether it was hypnotism or whether it was magnetism, there were no decisions up front about what it could and couldn't help with. And so you get documented cases. There's all the Esdale stuff. But if you look at James Braid's cases, he's doing stuff which you just get people that have had chronic illness for years, and he's remedying it in 3 sessions of hypnotism. And literally all he's doing is he's putting them into a hypnotic state by his method and leaving them there for 10 to 12 minutes and then bringing them out. There's one case of this woman who had like all these skin problems and everything. She'd had them for years, all sorts of like migraines and eye problems. Really, she was falling apart. And it all remedied after 3 sessions of this sort of hypnotism process. Now, again, James Braid, he's not using suggestion directly. There's nothing tailored. It's just like, yeah, put her in the state, leave her there for 12 minutes.
Yeah, but indirect suggestion might be even more powerful.
Indeed, it might be.
Because they come for the session because they want healing.
Yeah.
Right. So there's an indirect like expectation, or at least.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting thing to me, because the way I work is I really get into people's belief structures, right? I'm quite strategic, quite tactical. Yeah. I'm sort of like doing an analysis of the things, figuring out what needs nudging where and all of this. And I've done that for years, and I get results doing that. But I'm now scratching my head going, am I making life really hard for myself?
This is what I'm thinking, dude. Like, what if all of hypnosis is just like an extra layer on top of mesmerism, to use as an example? Right? What if all the talking is just fluff to give us a sense that like the mighty left brain is doing the work, right? In the sense that like we are doing something and we can make sense of it. But what if it is so much simpler? What if it's just an expectation? Or what if even more than that? What if there is something outside of our awareness that when we have the expectation, we contribute, like this studies on prayers and stuff. Like what if there is an energy or a mesmeric magnetic fluid, an ether or something that's outside of our awareness or outside of dimensions that we can see or feel a measure.
Right. And what if it's all of that and everything and none of it? And in the end, I think like where I'm at with it is going, okay, so, and this fits with what you're talking about and the edges of the map. It's like, okay, well, let's just go off the map. Instead of going, I'm only going to do the things that make sense to me, or I'm only going to do the things I have a clear rationale for. I'm only going to do the things, which I'll admit, as a change work practitioner, that's what I do most of the time, is the stuff I have a rationale for. Right. The stuff that makes sense. I don't go wildly doing things that don't make sense.
No.
But I'm starting to do more now with clients. I'm starting to take, I suppose you could call it, take more risks, go off map, go, I'm going to do this thing that doesn't really make sense right now, or it doesn't add up for me or something. I'm starting to do a lot of things I've dismissed in the past. But of course, a lot of the time with this stuff, it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it.
Yeah. But this is like the part that's exciting in this for me that I can relate to is the edge of the map, the dragon, like just whether it's almost like more exciting to explore that territory than it is to get results through some simpler approach.
Right.
That's interesting, but it's like, I'm actually most turned on by the idea that like, oh, I could do this in a totally different way that's uncomfortable for me. And for me, the hook in this area of the map is like, if I don't understand it, then I might not be able to make sure that they understand me. And if I'm not understood, that's not safe. That's one of my like patterns. And so if I can't explain it, then I'm going to, hold back.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Like I'm a big believer that if you're going to do hypnotism, then you have to be willing to be misunderstood. Right? Because you can't, I happen to think that the trickster archetype, I think it's really big there. But to go back to what you were saying just then about like, is it interesting or is it exciting? Is it, it's not all about, well, what do I know is going to work or what do I believe is going to work? Something that Erickson said, Milton Erickson, was, if you have a difficult problem make an interesting design of it. And I love that. It's not like if you have a difficult problem, really figure out how you need to solve it. Like not figure out what's going on, make an interesting design of it.
What do you mean by make a design of it? I get the interesting piece, but what does that mean?
Because like Erickson, the reason Erickson was such a productive guy in terms of like hypnosis, innovation in the world of hypnotism, is because he constantly did new things. It's like, done that. I know I can do that way because I've already done it. So what haven't I done yet? What could I do next? What about this? What about that? So he's always making an interesting design of every single case that comes into him, instead of just going, oh yeah, this is this and this is what I do for this. It's like, I'm going to do it differently because otherwise it's not making an interesting design of it. So every intervention,
to have it be a fun experiment or something.
Yeah,
basically.
He's got to be like doing something different and interesting and cutting new grounds. The interesting thing about Erickson is he never intended to be in private practice. He always wanted to be a research guy. Because of his chronic pain issues, because of his polio and post-polio, he had to go into private practice so that he could go and lie down and do self-hypnosis between seeing clients because he had so much chronic pain stuff going on. So I think probably that desire to explore and experiment that he really wanted to be his career, he took into doing his private practice work, and therefore is very exploratory, very experimental.
Yeah.
And that's what makes him such an interesting guy to me.
I was talking about, that reminds me of something that I was seeing yesterday, and I was in conversation with a client, I think it was, and I was, somebody was asking me about about what's my intention when I come to a conversation, and how do I show up the way that I do in conversation with somebody to help them to create the results, specifically in the amount of freedom I have to go wherever I do and to essentially explore and experiment. Because I was saying, like, I come to the conversation without like necessarily a plan. Of course, I've got some unconscious patterns that have efficacy because I've learned a bunch of stuff, but I certainly don't have a conscious plan. And I definitely don't have like the idea that I need to be effective at something. And so I'm therefore ready and willing to just, if something shows up intuitively that I can't make any sense of, I'm willing to just say it, just to see what happens. Because I'm really engaging in the conversation as exploration, and I find it fun. Actually, I was trying to remember the name of the amusement park that you like in the UK that has the big roller coasters. What's it called?
Probably Alton Towers.
Alton Towers. Yeah, that's the one I couldn't remember yesterday, but I was like, it's like going to for me, an amusement park. When I go into a conversation, it's just like riding roller coasters. I'm just throwing something out there and I'm like, oh, let's see what happens. It's just fun. And I'm engaging in the conversation for that reason. And so, but going back to the point you were making, it's like, for me, what gives me the freedom to show up in a conversation that way is because I see the other person as the one that's resourceful and is going to either create something with what I shared or isn't. And that's where the power really is. And so I'm almost like, what I come up with is almost irrelevant. I think I've told you about my bag of crisps metaphor. Like, if I had an issue in my marriage and you locked me in a room with a bag of crisps, which we say in the US, potato chips, I'd read the information on the back of that bag and I'd figure out what it is in my relationship I need to shift to make things work.
Right.
So the content is almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
And I've done this with clients before. It's actually taken a bag of potato chips, and with the intention of commitment, you create an insight that's super valuable for you with any content. So I see myself as like a bag of chips showing up in the presence of a resourceful thing I would call a human being. And why do I see them as so resourceful and so capable of coming up with that insight, which gives me the freedom to just do whatever, is because I see myself that way. And that their resourcefulness is a projection of my own. So I honor their autonomy in the way that I honor mine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And this is really, if you look at Erickson's work, or even the old mesmerists, a lot of them believed that once you got somebody into this state and you sort of cleared through their system, then they would return to a natural state, which was by default healing and generative. And Erickson, so if people are listening don't know who Erickson is, he was a 20th century hypnotist, died in 1970, born in 1901. But Erickson's belief was the trance state, as he called it. This state was a state in which somebody unhooked from what he called habitual associative sets.
Hmm.
Right? So normally when somebody goes to solve a problem, or when they do their problem, they do that problem in the same way every single time. The same thoughts run in the same way, the same responses happen. It's all kind of habituated in a sense. And then they try and
Hmm.
solve the problem. They go around the same habitual thought loops and do the same kinds of things. His view was once you unhook somebody from their habitual associative sets, their inner creativity, their creative unconscious mind, he would use it, will start to weave new solutions together because it's free to do so. So like, an NLP that was influenced by Erickson, they've got that presupposition, which is people have all the resources they need. This comes from Erickson. Like literally, that could mean anything: resources, life experiences, skills, perceptions, beliefs. But underneath of that is that fundamental, like generative, creative, unconscious mind that has built for you every single adaptive response that you have.
Yeah. That's the resourcefulness that I'm speaking to.
Yeah.
That ability to create something from, whatever stuff is present.
Mm. Yeah.
You sent me an article this morning, or not an article, a YouTube video about how DeepSeek is disrupting capitalism.
Yeah.
That was awesome. I thought DeepSeek was really interesting. I mean, that guy didn't explain it in detail, but like for me, the summary is useful of understanding how DeepSeek was trained by asking ChatGPT and probably some other AIs, what is your model of the world? Which essentially, like, OpenAI paid $500 million or something to train their AI, their ChatGPT on all of the world's data, so it could generate a model of the world. And then the Chinese company, this hedge fund, was like, well, what if we just asked it what its model of the world was and just like got all the answers, then use that to build our model? And they were able to do that for like $5 million instead of $500 million.
Right.
And it's just as good, if not better, because it's so much lighter and more compressed.
And of course,
wild.
ChatGPT are all like, "Oh, you've stolen our stuff." It's like, yeah, but you stole everyone else's stuff.
Yeah. Oops.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, what about that dude? Did you look at the guy from OpenAI that supposedly committed suicide? Did you look into that at all?
No, I didn't know anything about it.
Dude, it is so scary, dude. It's like he left OpenAI and he was like whistleblowing on that. The reason I thought of it is because he was whistleblowing specifically on how they were stealing copyrighted information and data to train the model.
Yeah.
And he was deeply involved in that. I was like, this isn't cool. Left the company, whistle blew, and then was like saying to the news organizations, I'm happy to talk to you. And it was within days that he like committed suicide. And dude, it's like the craziest. Check it out. He's like, he committed suicide supposedly after he beat himself up all over his house, opened up all his cabinets and drawers, bled throughout his house, and then he shot himself in the bathroom while he was flossing his teeth. Some like crazy, impossible like story, and he supposedly had a USB drive with data on it that his mother knew about or something that's like missing. And, it's scary, man. Like that, at that level of power, how easy it is to cover up these kinds of things.
Right.
We can't know for sure, but like it's almost ridiculous to call it a suicide.
It reminds me of this guy. I've just Googled him up. This was years ago. Dr. David Kelly here in the UK, who was a whistleblower on some stuff around the Iraq war.
Yeah.
And he was like, right, I'm coming out. I'm speaking to the press. Oh, I'm dead in the woods.
Well, it's leading cause of suicide, whistleblowing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, it's almost like, why would somebody go through all that and then kill themselves?
Yeah.
It's nuts. You know, but what's the nuts part? What's nuts to me is like how much momentum the machine of opinion the machine of authority and its opinion has, right? Like,
how do you mean?
Because if all it has to do is say, this is what happened, the coroner says this is what happened. And, it doesn't matter that the coroner is connected to the people with power, that's I'm the coroner and that's what goes. That's literally what happened. The mother called the coroner. She said, what about like the bleeding from the scrotum and the bruise on the back of his head? I'm the coroner and I say it was a suicide. Click. It's like, okay, that's how, then it's like, well, that's what the coroner said.
Yeah.
And there's so much of that. There's so much momentum for authority in our world. And, there was a comment on a post of some kind of parenting thing about how like, you need to teach your kids to like have respect for authority. And that was just, I guess it was the light I saw it in. I was like, you know what? I get that as a parent. Like I want my kids to have respect, but the phrase of respect for authority, I was like, what if these kids growing up that don't have respect for authority is actually a swing of the pendulum that we fucking need? Because it's this overabundance of respect for authority that's got us our freedom handcuffed from the inside out.
Right. It's kind of interesting. I was talking to Lexi about this the other day, and we were talking about somebody we know who...
Lexi, your wife.
Yeah. Who...
for those who are listening.
Right. Yeah. Somebody we know who has the opinion very much and has actually said, oh, no, I think people should do what they're told. When the conversations around questioning authority have come up. And she's very much like, no, people should do what they're told. And this is someone who's like, previous generations of family were wiped out in the Holocaust, or, a lot of them were killed in the Holocaust. And it's just like, well, hang on a second. Those kind of Auschwitz prison guards were people who were doing what they were told by authority. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So
it
doesn't
what'd she say to that?
Well, we've never said that to her because, frankly,
Right.
It would
Somebody
be,
told you not to.
It would be an undiplomatic thing to say. It would be
Sure.
like I think there's a call to be made when having those kind of conversations.
Yeah.
Some people hang out in particular worldviews because that worldview is the comforting worldview for them. Do you see what I mean? And like, to what degree do you want to take that away, and in what context, or to what degree do you want to challenge it? I don't know the answer to that, what's right or wrong, but sometimes there's that call that's made, which is, if this person wants to continue in that worldview, who am I to say they ought to change it?
Yeah, that is literally where I've been hanging out a lot in my figuring out and understanding, is how much of my pulling back from saying things or asking things that would be disruptive to the status quo or to the reality or whatever is going on. How much of that is because I am unconsciously trying to stay safe? And how much of it is because for me, the highest contribution I can make to life or reality in this moment is me not saying something there.
Right.
Right. It's like just trying to distinguish that. And I know from my own exploration of like my shadow, like this past year, actually, I guess past 6 months since my vision quest, and since that, like meeting the dragon in the cave on the mountain I've shared with you, and that, which is an, expression of my shadow side, where I got like this visceral experience of deep pleasure in the idea of being despised. Ever since then, I have become like really fascinated trying on a regular basis. You talked about circumambulation, right? Like going around and around the self as somebody who is happy to be hated, free to be feared, and really like finding this, and actually, going from like fearing and hating Trump in 2016, trying to do everything I could to not have him in office, and then to voting for him in 2024 and being relieved when he won. A lot of that came through like letting go of my projections of this way of being in him that I can still see now as unacceptable. Right. And it's like, as I became more willing to accept a side of me that may be disruptive and may make people feel uncomfortable, I became able to see how much of an absolutist I was being in the world and not really seeing the Tao, or seeing a term that I heard recently that I've never heard. I've heard it my whole life, this term, but I never heard it the way I did recently. Necessary evil. And I always heard that and I felt bad. It was like, I always felt sad when I heard that. But this time when I heard it, I was like, oh, fuck, that's the justification for evil, is that it's necessary. Evil in the sense of the opposite of what the popular opinion might desire.
Yeah.
And so, and by no means does that mean that I'm out there. Like, I think the thing I always feared is that if I opened to that, if I went beyond my like totally, absolutism around like purity and that the path of the good in whose ever opinion, right, was that like I would just go completely the other direction and I would just not give a shit about anybody. But what I didn't realize is that when you peel back fear, care still exists.
Yeah.
And actually there's more room for care to be that which I navigate from when I'm not afraid. And then sometimes people hurting, people being afraid can be the consequence of an expression of care that's uninhibited by fear.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree with you, because I mean, I'm sometimes quite rude to people. And I don't
You're
mean
better at that than me. Yeah.
I don't mean that I'm rude to them.
Historically.
You know, I look afterwards and go, well, that was quite a rude response, so it's quite dismissive or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm more rude than I used to be, but it isn't coming from a place of ill will or anything like that. It's just sort of abrupt. Like, you know, I gave the example of the guy, you know, I was in the back garden, in the shared garden, and the guy from the basement apartment came out with his dog, and it was early, and I was drinking my coffee, and I was in my own space, and it just came out. I said, you know, I said, sometimes I just want to sit out here and just be alone with my thoughts, or something like that, I said. And it just kind of came out.
When he was trying to chat with you?
When he was trying to chat with me, right?
He's the chatty guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't I didn't say it in a testy way or an angry way, because I wasn't angry or testy. It just literally kind of came out like a thought. And he went, oh, sorry, and then disappeared. And then, like, next time I saw him in the garden, I just happened to be in a hurry. I was in a real hurry. I'd taken my dog out, like he needed a wee in the morning, and I needed to get somewhere. And the guy came out and said, and started chatting. I said, look, I got to be out of here in 15 minutes. And he went, oh, what, you mean out of the garden? I said, no, out of the apartment. And he's like, oh. Anyway, I saw him a little bit afterwards, and he's got a dog, and I got a dog. And I said, oh, you know, when we're out in the garden, make sure you bring Monty out. That's his dog. And he went, I thought you liked to be on your own. I said, yeah, sometimes, but you know, you can trust me, I'll tell you.
Right.
Now the thing is, like, I'd actually said that to him partly because I was aware that the way I'd been on the previous 2 occasions may have upset him. Right. But I wasn't afraid of what he would think of me. Now, the old me would have been afraid of what he thought of me. It's like, oh no, I've upset him.
Right.
That's going to be, it's like, but instead of me being afraid for myself at him being upset, I had compassion for him because I didn't want him to feel that, you know, someone didn't like him or something when it wasn't true. Do you see what I mean? But that was for him and not for me. Now, the only reason that could
be a big difference.
Right. And that's an example. Now, that compassion wouldn't have been able to come through if I was afraid for myself. Oh no, he's going to think I'm this kind of a person. That would be bad because, you know, like, that's fear. So I think two different behaviors. One of them could come from fear. One of them could come from compassion. So if you're there and somebody's got a particular worldview and there's a part of you that wants to go, that's bullshit, right? And you want to come in. Well, maybe a lot of the time I might not do that if I think to myself, that would be unkind to this person, right? And it's not like, and I don't want them to think I'm an unkind person, and I don't want to be unkind. You know, they're not ready for this, that kind of thing. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I'm curious, because you said about going from somebody who was like absolutely in 2016, no Trump.
Yeah.
We must stop Trump at all costs.
Right.
To actually ultimately voting for Trump, you said. I'm kind of curious about this in terms of how this has been, like, and you've been quite open about this, as I understand. I mean, here we are on a podcast.
Here we are.
But have you been open about this before this podcast?
I haven't really been anywhere where I had the chance to be open or not open. Whenever it's in conversation with people, I'm open.
Right.
I don't find it serves me to not be open.
Yeah.
I might not share it with somebody if I see that they can't handle that. They can't handle the truth.
Right.
If it's going to disrupt them too much. So I'm conscious in that sense, not because I'm afraid, because I don't need to, kind of like you're saying, from compassion, I don't need to unnecessarily get somebody all tight in their pants.
Yeah.
But if that's not the case, then, you know, I'm happy to share it.
It's even interesting that I would be asking the question. You know, but I know, like, obviously I'm in the UK, so it's kind of different because I'm looking at this from the outside. And like I've said a few times, it seems that it's been very, very divisive, obviously, this election. There are people that are absolutely convinced that the other side, on both sides, are pure evil. You know, and like there's the good guys and the bad guys. It looks all like football team stuff to me. Our team's the greatest and that team's evil.
Yeah.
It looks like, and that's not a comment about either side. It just seems that there's much more of that dynamic in the US than in the UK. Like I said on one post, I said looks crazy from the UK because we know that all our politicians are useless, evil, slimy bastards, and none of them are the great savior. But it seems to be much more divisive in the US.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious about that divisiveness and how that's worked out for you in terms of talking about that, but maybe you don't have an answer to that yet.
Well, other people have asked me, like, how's it going for you? Like, have you lost any friendships? I'm like, no, I don't have that way of being around politics that it is divisive for somebody. Well, I think maybe the reason is because I don't feel like I flipped to the other side and now I'm like, oh no, I was wrong before, I'm right now. It's like, I've just zoomed out from the whole divisive things. And I was like, neither side is pure evil or pure good. There's just this game going on where it's two sides of the same coin. And like, for me, voting for Trump, like to me, he's largely the same character that I didn't want in 2016. And the reason in 2016 I didn't want him in is because I saw that the culture that his leadership created was divisive. And I still see him being that kind of person now. I was hopeful that he might switch, but he's just as focused on his own, what's going to make him look good. And he's got that devices. Oh, they're supporters, they're not supporters. It's crazy. And so it wasn't like I went to like, oh, now I like that. What happened is I relaxed around evil as part of the story. And I can see it everywhere now. And I'm not so sure that, oh, I've got the good guys and they're the bad guys. I just don't have that idea anymore. It's like everybody's missing the fact that they're both. Yeah. And so if everybody's both, and some are willing to admit it and some aren't, now that I'm willing to admit that my own way of being has a little bit of a dot of evil in it, when I say evil, I mean something that is, contrary to popular opinion about what is good. Okay. Let's just say that for now, for ease of meaning. Everybody's got both in it. And so
shadow stuff.
Yeah. Shadow stuff. And so my vote for Trump was because I saw the people around him as people who were in support of freedom and decentralizing power to a certain degree more than I saw on the other side. Yeah. I might be wrong about that, but that's what I saw. And that's what I voted for in support of. The lesser of two evils for me was that vote. And so I don't have a Trump flag. I was supporting Kennedy more directly because I saw more beauty in that possibility. I saw a culture of unity in his message, which spoke to me, which was antithetical to the culture I think Trump creates. But there was going to be divisiveness either way. Biden did fucking zero to create unity in this country. Zero. Or whoever was puppeteering Biden did zero. Like nothing became more together in that. So it's like, 6 for one side, half a dozen the other. Fuck it. Like let's go for something else. And so
that's kind of like my view, politically speaking. I voted in the UK for Keir Starmer, and I had a bad feeling that I was going to regret it, and I regret it. So there we go. But then again, I would have regretted it had I voted the other way, and that had come out because it just seemed like a choice between crappy people that were, as far as I'm concerned, I believe the role of government and state is to be on the side, is to be a counterbalance to private interests, right? That's what I see. This is my view. Other people or look at it differently. And, in the UK, it used to be there were two parties. There was the party of private interests and the party of the counterbalance to private interests, or that looked at, public goods and collective goods. And they were both largely democratic, so neither of them were particularly authoritarian, which was nice. And I say democratic, I don't mean in an absolute sense. But then at some point, we go back, and I think you get the similar thing in the US. So Tony Blair with New Labour was now we're going to align with the private interests. So we're just going to be like the other side, also align with private interests, because that's the only thing that can ever be, quote unquote, good for the economy, whatever. And I think Clinton did the same thing. As I understand it, I'm not a scholar of US politics. But so you've got a Democrat Party, which is also now aligned with private interests. And whilst they may espouse certain social messages and things that people can go, that seems like the good socially progressive thing, I think underneath of it all, they're probably, and I could be wrong, like you say, you could be wrong, they're probably still aligned with people that just want to aggregate wealth and power into fewer and fewer hands. And I, one of the things I do find kind of odd is a party that's become more authoritarian, it would seem, pointing a finger at the other side going, they're the authoritarians, which I don't claim to be an expert on this. I'm an outsider looking at it, but I'm sort of seeing kind of a rise in authoritarianism by people who claim not to be authoritarians. And for me, I'm not a fan of that, because I like to, I have a classical liberal tendencies, I suppose.
Yeah. I just have a high value for freedom,
which
for myself and others.
That's a part of classical liberal values, is like, is freedom, is moral kind of distribution of power and wealth, not necessarily like an authoritarian distribution. This is the thing. That was the interesting thing about that video that I sent you, is the guy was saying this is a disruption to American capitalism.
Yeah.
And American capitalism is about the aggregation and hoarding of power and anti-competitive practices, which most people think that American capitalism is the opposite of that. It's about free markets and competition and all of this. But that guy's view, at least, is that like the seat of American capitalism is that the powerful make moves to legislate for things that can protect their wealth and power.
Its intention is to not be that way, but it works out that way, where it's actually really impossible to compete, because, they're supposed to stop monopolies, but there's so much monopolization anyway.
I think that guy's point, which is an interesting point, and this starts to get like onto kind of old school, perhaps more left-leaning economic values, because he mentioned in that the idea of rent-seeking. I think he used the term rent-seeking off patents. Right. So like, it's like, we own this legally, so you have to pay us money to use it. Instead of like in a real free market, it's like, hey, you built that thing, we could build that thing too. No, you can't, because we built it first and we got the patent. Right. So therefore you can't compete with us without paying us a slice.
Unless you're China, you just do it anyway.
Right. So China just do it anyway. That's why they can bust it open. But it is true that if you think about it, patenting things, some people might go, no, it's you protecting the fruits of your invention. That's one argument. I'm not saying that isn't the case, but it also is fundamentally uncompetitive. Anti-competitive.
Well, one of my favorite things you ever said, there's so many little things that you say from time to time, and that like they stick in my mind forever, and I run with them, but they become little mantras. But one of my favorite things you ever said, it was just an offhand thing, I've probably said it more times since than you, is once an idea goes in my head, I own it. Since I've reflected it back to you, it's like, well, I'm not sure I mean that, but like, there's just a truth to that for me. Like, once an idea goes in my head, I fucking own it.
Well, look, John, if I say something to you, if I go, I've come up with this idea, right? Yeah. And I go, boom, and I give it to you, and now it exists like literally in your neurology. It's there. It's in your neurology. Right. And then I go, but I still own that, John.
Yeah, that's why I started dropping F. I'm like, fuck you, you own that. That's my attitude. Yeah. Like, it's too late. You gave it to me. It's mine. Yeah. It's like if you gave me an object and then it's like, but I still own it. Then why'd you give it to me? Yeah. Maybe if we agree in advance, then you own it and then I'm renting it from you. But like, it's just so impossible to not have it influence in everything in your mind, that then everything else you create and unfold from that. Just like an LLM that's trained on all the world's data. Like it's there now. Right. And it's influencing every response to every prompt that every user gives it. Right. Right. And it's like, it's knowledge, particularly this is knowledge-based stuff, which is what patents are all about. It's like, we've got an idea, and now it's, we own this idea. And on the flip side of it, I was going to say devil's advocate. Go ahead. Yeah. I don't use that to justify egoically claiming things as my own that are not. Do you see what I mean? No, of course not. Which a lot of people you're acknowledging people all the time, right? Yeah. For overabundance of acknowledgement for where your ideas come from. I wish I had the same encyclopedic capacity to reference as you do, but
I don't have to, it's shot now compared
pretty
to how it
good.
used to be.
Okay, it must be long COVID.
Yeah.
But I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah.
So we're talking about devil's advocate, and also,
devil's advocate. Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
I think one of the functions of patents must be, again, I don't really know what the fuck I'm talking about here, but must be that like, if I come up with an idea and I'm going to build this thing and I'm going to invest shitloads of resources and time into building it to bring it to market, I want to have some security that like somebody else isn't just going to come and rip me off right away. And as I say that, I'm flipping back to their side. Cause like, that's nice to have that security, but also like, what if I didn't? What if everything was fucking open source?
Yeah.
What if everything was for collaborative instead of competitive, and yeah, I mean, I love open source. I love those, especially of the programming background, like those environments where people can just create like the AI Hugging Face as the AI open source community, where everybody is just sharing the AI they're developing. And there's so much cool shit coming out of there so fast because everybody's working together on it. What if everything was like that? Yeah. What would a world without patents look like? I'm sure somebody talks about this already somewhere.
But look, John, here's the way I think about it. It's you and I, we're actually in that world, right? Because
That's
if
true.
I
we're in
come
the
up,
ideas world.
yeah, we're in the ideas world. So if I come up with a model, I've got like my hypnotic loop, my 3 levels of mind. There's a guy in Germany who's like got a TV show he built around like that hypnotic loop thing, and I could be going, you need to play me a cup.
Oh,
but
of course.
That's not how that world works, right? So the thing is, the way it goes, we don't get to rent seek off our ideas. We don't get to have an idea and then kick back.
People they try to get intellectual property around certain processes and ideas.
Yeah, and it almost always fails.
Change the vocabulary a little bit, and then suddenly it's a new thing. And yeah,
right. So what do you and I do in this, being in this space? What do we do when like somebody else is running with our idea or whatever? There's all sorts of ideas.
Create something else.
Exactly.
Just keep creating.
You have to create. There's a part of me that goes, wouldn't it be nice to have been able to retire on the stuff I did years ago?
But it would be fucking boring. And I like having, I've said this before, and then I made a YouTube video years ago called Steal My Ideas. And it was because I fucking like having people on my heels. I like having to go out and like create more ideas. Right. And so if everybody's always taking my ideas and running with them, then it keeps me in the game of creation, which I actually enjoy. It's kind of keeps me feeling alive.
Exactly. And that's the thing about the sort of industry, quote unquote, or the business that we're in, is if you're not creating and coming up with fresh stuff, it's over for you.
Yeah.
Right? You don't get to stop. You don't get to rent seek off a collection of old ideas. It just doesn't, it doesn't work that way. But a patent is doing that. Now, I get it. I get why people go, it's mine. I came up with it. I put all this work in. And there's that argument that people come up with and say, well, if you didn't give patents, what is the incentive for people to invent? As if they only invent for the incentive of having something to rent seek off of or to get to retire off of. I think people invent because they're inventive people, because they have a good idea. They have, whatever. And I'd admit it must be annoying. I've got somebody who claims that they came up with the idea for like, Deliveroo or Uber Eats or whatever. They came up with that idea first and they had some app. I don't know whether they really did or whether they really didn't. But, it didn't work.
Sorry.
They didn't bring it to market in the right way. It never happened. Maybe they feel aggrieved and that they should get their just desserts because they came up with the idea, but they didn't make the idea work.
Yeah, when I think about trying on that way of being, I feel like such a victim, and I feel like so weak and so tethered to circumstance. It's like, the sun's shining and there's a light breeze right now, but they did cancel school today because this massive tropical storm that's supposed to be like tearing Maui apart right now hasn't started. Supposed to start 4 hours ago. So I almost wasn't going to have this podcast recording with you today. But if it hadn't happened, me being upset about that would be kind of the same. It's like, no, we were supposed to do this thing. And then like this natural event happened. That's not fair. I find there being a lot of freedom relating to everything that's happening in the world in the same way I might relate to a storm. Right. I'd say like, shifting the political world's like fighting a hurricane with a sailboat. It's like, and if I get pissed about that, it's pretty silly because I'm not really going to change this hurricane with the sailboat, but I can make the most of it, batten down the hatches, and like when the sun comes back, like sail, enjoy life, and have something to say about, things. And, maybe the butterfly flaps its wings and there's not a hurricane next year.
I'm just thinking about that thing around, like, I made this thing and now I'm entitled to get income from it because I invented it.
Right. Uber Eats should give me a cut of every pizza.
So, like, we evolved as hunter-gatherers.
Yeah.
And, like, you don't go out and go, I speared that boar, so now I shouldn't have to do any more boar spearing for the next, like, 6 months or a year or whatever.
No, you just share it.
Right? You spear the boar, you share the boar, and then you go out and you get more boar, or you get berries, or you get eggs, or you get whatever you get. And you have to get again. So, like, the natural state of affairs for us human beings is to be engaged in activity to be creating the wealth that we need, right? Not to set ourselves up so that we can retire. I mean, retirement is completely unnatural.
Yeah.
The idea is you remain engaged in life. So I don't know, there's something artificial about that. But I mean, again, you can't make that argument.
But
because the
problem is that that's what I was going to say. The problem with artificial means of creating income to provide for yourself is that it's necessary in a world that is artificially not abundant. Like here in Hawaii, if you just throw seeds into the ground, they grow. It's like insane how abundant the soil is. But if you don't own land, you can't do that. And there was a political representative, maybe a senator or a congressperson in Oahu, that was arguing that they should be able to use the parks, the community should be able to use the parks to grow food. And the government's response, oh no, you can't do that. Because then we'd be liable for things. Like, liable for what? Well, I don't know. We'd be liable, for what doesn't matter, but we'd be liable as a concept is the first thing. And then there's also the, well, who would take care of it? Well, the community. Well, how could we make sure they took care of it? Well, they didn't, and there wouldn't be food, but there's not food right now. So it's like, it's just all these like nonsensical responses to stop it from happening.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately they didn't get approval, but they just did it anyway, and nobody stopped them.
Yeah.
And it's like, why is there not food? We have all these open spaces and we can't grow food. You're not allowed to. You can't just go and pick a banana in the park and eat it.
Yeah. Well, it's just because the US, like, I know maybe is outgrown Britain now, but the US is the child of Britain, and Britain had the foreclosure movement many, many years ago. So once upon a time, there were things called the commons. Land was common. People just farmed the common land. They had the bit, they just farmed it.
Yeah.
That's how it was. And at some point, the lords, the barons were like, maybe we should own that land and you should work for us. So like now, of course, there is, I mean, especially in the US, there's no land that's unowned unless it's national parks.
State parks.
Yeah, state parks. It's like that idea of land ownership. I remember having this thought, like when I was really young. I was in junior school, so I'd have been like maybe 8 years old, maybe 9 years old at the time. We used to go from the school to the swimming pool on the school bus. And I remember driving through town and looking at all these buildings and thinking, people own these buildings. But the land that they're built on was around before human beings. So how, who was the first owner of the land? It didn't make sense to me at the time. It's like, how could somebody own something? And of course, the answer is, well, it's the person that went, this is mine now.
Right.
The person that took it.
They patented land.
Yeah. But
it's my land.
I think that's the old Marxist line, isn't it? All property is theft. The reason all property is theft is because when you track back, at some point somebody took something.
Right. Yeah, and said it's mine, and I'll kill you if you take it or come on it or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is the world that we live in. We live in this.
That's what I was going to go back to. And so if it wasn't the world that we lived in, then we could just all collaborate and share. But because the world is so complex and it's the world we live in, we need these kind of other ways of creating income and holding on to some money, and not just, you know, I know that you've used that term rent seeking a lot, but like I also am invested in things and do have people that pay me rent. And I think that like we're all renting from each other actually in different ways, whether you're renting your Netflix subscription or you're renting your home, or, you know, we're in this world that we're in. So,
or
you know,
BMW with, you know, the heated seats thing. BMW about 6
making you pay to heat your seats.
They got heated seats, but they switch off your heated seats remotely if you don't pay the subscription.
I don't have that going on.
No,
I've got a Beamer with heated seats, but
I know. I think it was something they tried to swing, and there was such a big backlash against it. But that was the idea. It's like, well, we're just going to remotely break your seats if you don't keep paying us money.
Yeah, or just like, you know, itemize. I mean, my Beamer actually is leased, and so I guess I am renting the whole thing. But like they could you could lease aspects of it. I guess you could just lease driving the car. You could lease having warmth. You could itemize each piece of the car that you're leasing, I guess.
Yeah.
Especially because mine's an electric. Yeah.
I think with these things, there's ideology and there's pragmatism and there's all sorts of things, because, you know, there's a part of me that really believes in, I think it's not great that you get people aggregating like huge amounts of wealth, right? I can look at that. I can step back and go, yeah, if like most of the wealth of the planet is in a tiny minority of hands, that doesn't seem like a good thing. I don't think it's healthy, you know, a healthy part of the ecosystem. And yet, I too, you know, we all make our, we all create our cutoff points. It's like, oh no, excessive wealth. We don't want people. Yeah, I don't have excessive wealth. I just have
non-essential services.
Yeah, you know, so it's like
idea.
It's like, well, they should tax people who have got more wealth than me, definitely, you know, but not me,
but not that much more.
Yeah, you know,
like,
well, I don't know,
a bit more than me.
There's Gary of Gary's Economics. He's an interesting guy. I don't know if you've ever seen him.
You've mentioned him. I can't remember.
He's a working class guy from London.
Oh yeah, he got into trading.
Yeah, got into trading, made millions, and now he's got this whole channel which is about how basically you need the single message is, if we don't tax the wealthy, we're screwed. Right? Isn't like capitalism is screwed, everything's screwed. At some point, wealth tax has to come in. He's against income tax and for wealth tax.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, I like the idea of taxing assets, not income.
Right. It's difficult to do that.
That's where real wealth is. Yeah, no, of course.
Right. But it's like, so his point is that we could solve like all the problems of wealth inequality and all of this by taxing excess wealth. And I think that his figure is over like a really, really high level, like, you know, over
100 million or something, or
something like this, over 100 million in assets. Then you could solve the problems. But of course, it's very difficult to quantify, because people have got those kind of assets. It's like, well, how do you even begin to audit this? How do you begin to value this? And then in order to extract the tax, they have to sell the assets. And people go, well, that's terribly unfair that I have to sell my home.
Or they borrow money or they use debt to pay it.
The argument against it is, well, I'd have to sell my assets. That's unfair. You're taking my...
That's such bullshit. That's where all the wealthy that have assets get their cash from debt anyway. So, but yeah, who knows? But then there's also so much of the asset values are overinflated evaluations for like tech companies and things like that. And so, like NVIDIA's value, what was it 2 weeks ago? And what is it today? So imagine if they got a tax bill for their evaluation 2 weeks ago, and now they got to pay it this week.
Right.
It's like they're screwed. So yeah, it's not an easy solution.
That was an interesting point that guy was making in the DeepSeek video about have China done this now as a deliberate strategic move to damage
because of Trump's tariffs thing. Yeah,
because of Trump's tariffs. That's an interesting thing.
I don't know, maybe, but. I mean, who knows? It's like the timing of it seems to make sense based on how it was designed, you know, and the amount of time it would take from being built off of the ChatGPT one. So, I don't know. I heard, I think it was Dave Smith talking about, there's a libertarian political commentator, comedian talking about how it would be pretty cool to have another Cold War in the sense of like the space race aspect of it. He said that DeepSeek's like Sputnik. When Russia like put the satellite in space And the US was like, oh shit, like step this up. And then they're like, went for the moon and got to the moon. That like maybe DeepSeek will be like, oh shit, let's do this. Let's like ratchet it up. I think it was him talking about it. Maybe it was somebody else, but, you know, that it could be a good thing to see America like have something to unite around, like some common enemy, in the race of technology, supposedly, you know?
Yeah. Who knows where any of it goes? I love that line from Nassim Nicholas Taleb that the only lesson that you can learn from history is that nobody knows what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen yet because I'm just trying to ride the wave as I always do, you know? I've had this like, I haven't shared this with you. It's really synonymous with your return to being a hypnotist after being one for a decade and then trying to separate yourself from it and then being like, actually, no, that's what I am. And then like coming back with like
the universe,
new power.
The universe insisted that I was a hypnotist, whether I liked it or
well,
not.
you know that I've been trying not to be a coach for a while now, but
Yeah.
I've had this like, you know, reconnection with being a coach. Like my friend Heather and my wife, the conversations with them just a week ago kind of helped me to just reconnect with it and like feeling really excited about being a coach again. Not that my work is changing or what I'm doing is changing, but just letting that identity, just connecting with that identity, and the power of it and realizing how many people see me that way. And something Heather said, which was like, you know, by you not calling yourself a coach, you're kind of like telling other people to feel bad about calling themselves a coach who actually look up to you and your work. And that really hit me like, I was like, oh, fuck, that's true. And that's not actually wasn't my intention at all. So that kind of like put a crack. Then the light started getting in. And another aspect of it, which I'm super pumped about, is that I have long had the story that I don't know the corporate world. I only worked in corporate for 6 weeks. And so that's not my clientele. I work with entrepreneurs, sole proprietors, self-employed, small business owners, like creatives. It's just like, that's the language I know. That's my life has always been. And I think there's both truth and fiction to that in the sense that like I could meet a gatekeeper in the corporate world. I could learn that world and I could serve that world. I could create corporate trainings and I could do all that with my business. Of course I could. And there's truth to the fact that I don't know that vocabulary and I don't know that world. And the context of having an employee and working at certain times and reporting to somebody and having them be the determining factor of my income, that's also not very attractive to me. So there's truth in that. And yet I had this holy shit, like realization that like, I think it was through listening to Alex Hormozi's $100 Million Offers audiobook, which by the way, I've been into now finally after like not really being into it for a while. And I know that your wife was, and now my wife's super into Alex Hormozi. And I also don't know if it's his biceps or his brain, but could be a little bit of both. Yeah. But, he's pretty badass. But anyway, like thinking about markets and thinking about, niching and thinking about the value of niching for coaches, but then like niching down from that even more. And I don't know how I saw it, but I just saw they're like, holy shit. I know Kaplan was saying, oh, you should really market on LinkedIn. And I'm like, LinkedIn's not my place. Like, I don't want to do LinkedIn because it's like corporate. And so my whole, and I'm not corporate thing was coming up. And then the other thing though, that came into presence was this insight that I had about the difference between a marketing funnel and what I do in my day to day as my service. So like my main work is helping human beings to be more free, loving, and powerful creators. So through that, they can create a more beautiful life in every area of their life. And through more beautiful lives, we have a more beautiful world. That's my mission. That's what I do. So if I'm doing that on the day to day, I'm happy. I love that work. It's diverse. It's beautiful. It's fun. If I just have to help coaches create clients and that's the only context I'm working in, that's an aspect of what I like, but it's not all of it. Yeah. But once I saw this, I was like, oh, what's actually true for me is that the best way to be a successful coach is to be really fucking great in life, to be really great at creating what you want in your life. Then you can help. If you want to be a great life coach, be fucking awesome at life. Yeah. Full stop.
Yeah. I agree.
And like, then you're fucking helping people from the resource of your own experience. If you want to be a great financial investing coach, then fucking get good at that. Yeah. That's how I've been a great coach, is to just focus on learning how to create myself and create my life. And so I was like, holy shit. Then I can have a marketing funnel that speaks directly to coaches. Hey, you want to be a great life coach? Cool. I'm not going to say, here's your how to coach course. Fuck that. And I'm not going to say, here's how to create clients course. Fuck that. I'm going to say, here's how to be a fucking powerful creator of your life to create fucking awesomeness and be the best in every area of life. Have an amazing marriage, whatever the thing is, relate like health and fitness, your spiritual connection, your business, whatever it is, how to create all of that is awesome. Because when you're doing that, people are going to want you to coach them in life.
Yeah.
Right. So now I've got this perfect bridge from the marketing to coaches into like the actual work that I'm really great at. And so I'm open to marketing to coaches suddenly because I'm not stuck doing just how to coach or how to create clients. And then we marry that with this idea about LinkedIn. And I suddenly was like, oh, actually, that would be like, holy shit, what if I was the guy that helped people leave LinkedIn or leave corporate? And suddenly the whole corporate industry becomes like, oh my God, that's my market.
Yeah.
And so now we're working on this tagline, like leading the corporate exodus, right? Like that's literally who I am. Like if you want to leave corporate and become a coach and create a life of freedom and beauty, like I'm your guy. I can help you do that. Yeah. So I'm really excited about like hanging out in the corporate environment on LinkedIn, being like, anybody want to leave? Anybody?
Right.
Want to go? Come this way.
But this fits with, because again, go back to Nassim Nicholas Taleb. The only lesson of history is no one knows what's coming next. We don't know what's coming next in our own personal history, in our own path, right? And going back to the gatekeeper thing, and you were saying, well, I don't know the corporate world. I only worked in it for like 6 weeks or whatever, which is kind of true. So you don't know it. And the truth of the matter is if you wanted to enter the corporate world as a corporate coach and you don't know it, maybe you can find a way in, right? But it's interesting. Now, I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but there's a future timeline out of an infinite number of future timelines where you look back and you go, oh, I shifted into helping people in the corporate world, exit the corporate world. And then by doing that, I coached a load of people in the corporate world, came to understand how corporate world thinking works.
Yeah, it could happen.
And then I am coaching people in the corporate world.
I'm open to that.
But
I'm just,
it's
where I'm at right now.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm seeing, to use the gatekeeper word, like I'm seeing that I can be the gatekeeper for their exodus, for them to be introduced to another world, and I can offer that. And then suddenly I'm excited to talk to all of them, all of the ones that are interested in leaving.
And it could be a two-way door.
It could be a two-way door, but I look back at the clients that I have. So many of my former clients and present clients have been people who wanted to exit that world. And this speaks to, we don't know what's coming, but I am surfing the wave of what's here now. And one of the waves that is here now is AI, hence my partnership in the AI company that I shared with you previously. And also I'm surfing this wave of people being disenchanted with meaningless corporate work and wanting something, a different life that's more free and more exciting and work that's more meaningful. And so I'm riding that wave too. Will it just, crash and not be something I can surf? I don't know, but it's here now for sure.
Right. And to me, this is what I love about Wallace Wattles, The Science of Getting Rich. One of the idea that I come back to from that book more than any other is fill your current place fully. Right? That is the key. Fill your current place fully. You cannot act from where you are not. Right? You can only kind of act from where you are. So it's only by filling. Now, the trick of that's an easy thing. You see, I've stayed with this for years. Fill your current place fully. It was never clear to me what my current place was. You have to really know your current place and understand it in order to fill it fully, right? This is partly for me why I stepped back in and embraced being a hypnotist. It's like, well, if the universe insists, that is my current place. So instead of me going, yeah, but I've done with that phase of my life and I want to do this and struggling to get away from where I'm at, instead of filling my current place fully. Right now, you're filling your current place fully. You're seeing more potential in your current place. Do you see what I mean? But it's that filling it fully. If you're not, then you're just always trying to start again, And that isn't how things grow. Things don't grow by starting again.
Yeah. Nope. Are you back in boxing?
No. Yes and no. I did start boxing again a couple of weeks ago. Went twice. Then last week on Monday, the dog busted his legs and then was on 3 legs. So like this is all.
Your boxer busted his legs.
The boxer and stopped me boxing.
Boxer dog. Yeah.
So we took him to the vet on Tuesday morning, which would be normally when I would have been boxing. And the vet said, he said, my bet is on a cruciate ligament. I'm like, oh, okay. And then he went, oh, I'm not so sure. It's got quite a lot of stability, but he's quite a muscular dog, so maybe not. And I took him to a physio on Thursday that somebody recommended, a dog and horse physio. And she went, yep, definitely cruciate ligament busted. He needs surgery, and he needs it as soon as possible. Otherwise, he'll damage himself more. I know this guy. He's a surgeon. You speak to him. He'll have him in tomorrow. He'll do the surgery tomorrow. Right?
Okay.
Which would have been Friday.
Okay.
I spoke to the surgeon. I looked into the operation. It's like 2 months cage rest afterwards for the dog.
2 months.
It's really invasive operation. She saw the top off the bone, invert it, put it back the other way. Like, it's like nature's got it wrong. We know how to re-engineer the leg.
Right, of course. The fucking bone was upside down.
Yeah.
That's what it was. Yeah.
So, like, really, and then a really long recovery time, all the physio. Now, she does the physio for all of the operations. He said he's done 700 of these operations. God. I'm like,
Do they go on cruises together?
I don't know. Conflict of interest, though. But here's the thing. If we'd have done what she said, right now, our dog, and like the basic vet said, yeah, we said he's a boxer. We can't keep him in a cage rest for like 8 weeks. He's like, yeah, it probably needs sedation. It's like, okay, so he'll be sedated for 8 weeks, basically. This is going to be good for him. Anyway, and it would have cost a lot of money. And it would have cost a lot of money.
So what'd you do?
Surgery.
So put him down?
We just kind of hung back, and he's fine. He's walking fine now.
Of course, man. Of course. Dude, it's crazy, like the medical system and for, like how massive it is, and how there's so much good that's infused with so much not good because of it being profit driven, and it's so hard to disentangle the pieces. I've been watching this YouTube video, this woman who's like a dentist, an MD, like she seems extremely knowledgeable, and she's got like this whole different take on dentistry where she's like, stop going to get cleanings. And I found it so fascinating because she's like, when you go and get cleanings, your dentist is doing the right thing by cleaning the plaque off your teeth. But what they're also doing is they're cleaning off the biofilm that is natural protective layer of your teeth.
Right.
And the problem is your biofilm is infected with a bacteria we call plaque. And instead of healing your biofilm, they're just removing it with the plaque and the film.
Yeah.
But it's leaving your teeth more exposed to new plaque and to creating cavities.
Right.
And if you had the biofilm, this is why ancestrally there are no cavities. And it's because the plaque is being created by these processed foods and these refined grains that we eat nowadays. And so if we were eating differently and we were caring for our mouth differently and or caring for your mouth differently, she talks about xylitol and things. I'm just getting into learning about her system. I haven't taken any of it on yet, but like, then we wouldn't have plaque and we could leave our biofilm in place and our teeth would be much healthier and stronger. And it's like, that's the kind of thing that's like completely invisible,
Yeah.
like, because you've got plaque, so you got to get rid of it. But the lack of the nuance around plaque is a thing that's infecting a natural thing that we're taking away too. That's not part of the conversation.
Yeah.
It's just not there.
This is why in the US, everyone has to refrigerate their eggs, but in Europe, they don't.
Because they wash them.
Because they wash them. It's like a legal requirement that you wash the film off that keeps the eggs from being porous and therefore getting infected.
So I refrigerate my eggs, even though I have my own chickens.
Yeah.
And the reason I do is because I wash them. Why do I wash them? It's because I think I need to, because I don't know how eggs are laid by chickens that in the UK.
Yeah.
That are not washed, because mine are covered in shit.
Oh yeah, they are.
My
often,
chickens.
Like if you get free range eggs, there'll be sometimes some chicken shit and some feathers and stuff like that. But
so my question then is like, do you wash it before you crack it, or do you because sometimes you get a little bit of yolk drip on the side.
It's gonna get cooked.
So it's okay to eat cooked chicken shit, basically.
My dog will eat raw chicken shit.
Your dog is. I don't know.
He loves duck shit. He loves duck shit. It's a delicacy.
So if I was willing to eat cooked chicken shit, then I could stop washing a dozen eggs a day.
It's a good
point.
That would
save me
I'm not saying
10 minutes a day of egg washing.
Well, yeah, in the end, I mean, you can relax about these things. I used to have a thing with eggs. Like when
that's an hour a week.
Well,
you might be saving me right now. Yeah.
But this is the thing. I mean, I don't know. UK eggs aren't usually. There's sometimes a bit of shit on a feather. There used to be more in the old days. So they're obviously cleaning them somehow, but they're not washing them. I don't know how they're doing it.
I'm going to Google that shit. Figure out.
But there's certain things, I used to, like with eggs, when I used to crack the egg, sometimes you get the little kind of like bloody bit or something. It's probably the beginnings of the...
Well, that's because they're fertilized eggs.
Right, exactly. So I used to be like, oh my God, I can't eat that. And they would be trying to scoop it out and stuff like that. Now I'm like, I'll eat that. That's fine.
Yeah, I know.
But the amount of time that saves, for example, is quite, even just like not fishing around for
Not
things.
scooping that out. Yeah. We had roosters, as you know, and we killed them all because if I didn't go and get the eggs for some time, and it would be a little bit more than a red thing, it would start to be a little tiny bit of a chick going on there. So you do get to a point where it's weird because I eat chicken and I eat eggs, but there's an in-between stage that doesn't feel good in the stomach. And this is probably just it's obviously just my mind.
It
but
is definitely psychological. This is my decision, it was psychological. And so I was going to therefore overcome
Just
it.
put it in the Vitamix.
Yeah. So this vet thing, just to kind of go back to this thing about kind of really galled me because in the UK, when 25 years ago, when I was younger, vets were reasonably cheap. Veterinaries were really reasonably cheap. And then there's been this kind of revolution of, well, everyone's got pet health care now. So they now charge top dollar because the insurance company is going to pay out and everyone's paying extortionate insurance. And it used to be the case that people didn't really have pet insurance. So the market was just people. So it kept the prices down. But I went in the vet and it's got their fees for everything are extortionate, eye-watering. And we don't have insurance because the premiums end up being so high.
Yeah.
You might as well, you're rolling a dice anyway. And they don't pay out half the time anyway. So I think it's a scam.
Yikes.
But they got this big basket out in the reception where people can contribute pet food and kibble. And it's got help us end pet poverty. And I just thought, you cheeky fuckers. You're talking about pet poverty, making it a big cause, but do you offer a discount to people who have a low income or anything like that? I don't know. Maybe they do. But it's excessive. The other thing I'll say about that is it would be very easy to be cynical about that physio and say, she does all of the rehabs, so therefore she is cynically going, I'll get that dog an operation because I get all the rehab business, right?
I think she probably believes in it.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think she's so invested in the idea, like he
care.
needs this surgery.
Yeah, I think it's an expression of care that's coming from her heart.
Yeah,
and she's wrong. Like, just because it's care and it's coming from your heart doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
We can do very caring things that are destructive, that hurt. And so I don't think like, because I care, it is definitely the highest good for all. I do think that when everybody comes from care, the net is a positive, but like, I don't think that every single person's expression of care is necessarily a contribution or good.
There's also,
I know that all mine aren't.
Right.
Yeah.
She might care, but she also has, it would seem, a very high level of certainty about
That's why
right.
your care is subject to that. You can care through a worldview, and unbeknownst, you can not realize that your care is being pulled through your worldview that could have some certainties in it that don't map to reality.
This is the thing, though. She basically said if he doesn't get this surgery done tomorrow, the joint will be damaged further. But he's like, basically, like, so we've not seen the further damage. We've just seen healing.
You're going to send her a video?
Well, Lexi said I'm going to video compared to last week because we got a video of him on 3 legs hopping along. We're going to video him now and go, here you go. Send that through.
I love that Lexi wants to send that to her.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not, like, what was I going to say? I was going to say it's not her fault. It's a little bit overly compassionate. I mean, is it a person's fault? Is it a person's responsibility? Must not say fault, but is it a person's responsibility to realize the frame they're stuck in and the certainty they're subject to, that is having them meet the world in a way that's not in the, in the service of all, for the highest good. It's not true. Are we responsible for that?
I don't know.
Or are we innocent in that act?
I don't know. I do know this. The original vet that we took him to, who said, I'll bet that my money is down on that being a cruciate ligament.
Yeah.
Right. And then he did an exam. He went, actually, I'm not sure. I respect that.
Nice.
Because he was like, oh yeah, I know what that is. Yeah.
Right.
And then he changed his mind
Right. But
upon
that's unheard of.
examination. Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
it's not the common thing, because a lot of people, like, they want to be right. And I thought, I respect you for not being the guy that
Yeah.
needs to be right
I love that.
about his
Yeah, there's
initial
a lot of
judgment.
freedom and power in that.
Yeah. So he went up in my rankings as like vet
That's cool.
I will go see.
Is that place less expensive and is he broke?
No, I don't know. I just the reason we go to that veterinary practice originally is because there was a vet called Margot there. And Margot is old school. She's been a vet for a long time. She's near retirement. And she always errs on the side of conservative treatment. So she doesn't rush people into surgery. So maybe there's a bit more, even though she's not there at the moment, she's off on long-term sick. Maybe, there's a bit more of that culture at that practice. We actually go quite a long way for that practice for that reason.
Yeah. Speaking of health and care, I wonder, we'll see what happens as we're recording this today. I don't know if they're voting today or tomorrow on Bobby Kennedy for Health and Human Services Secretary here in the U.S. Did you see any of that yesterday, of any clips from the argument with Senate?
I saw something about it going on. I've just been so unplugged from
politics,
news, all of that stuff for quite a few months probably now.
Yeah. I'm just excited for the disruption around health. Like, I'm excited for the culture shift in America, even more so than regulation. Just the fact that it's happening at that political level, and if it happens, the culture shift and of awareness that it will create. Like, there's so many people in this country that are so sick. I heard the stats were that America had the most COVID deaths per capita out of every country in the world, because we have this, and the CDC said that's because the Americans are the sickest people in the world.
Yeah,
it's like, that's fucking insane.
I bet they're not as sick as the Scots.
People just don't know. Maybe you don't count as a country since you're a subset of the UK.
Maybe.
But like, it's nuts to me, and I feel so sad. Like, I have members of my family, my extended family, who are sick with autoimmune conditions that just so don't understand how they create those conditions through the way that they eat. And like, to try to educate them at this stage of their life, it's such a radical existential shift from the entire narrative that you've lived for 50 years of your life around, like, what good food and healthy food is. It's like, it's a shame. It's so hard to, to be one random, like, nut job guy like myself being, oh yeah, you should eat this way instead. It's like, I just sound like a lunatic, to most people that are so invested in that reality. They're not looking for a gatekeeper. And so I think so many people could have such a better life if there was a culture shift around how dangerous and deadly so much of the American foods are.
Right. This was always the big thing about, like, a few years ago, this is before Brexit, there was some trade agreement going on between, I can't remember what it was called, but it was like a trade agreement between the US and the EU that basically, if it went through, it would mean the EU would have had to take in US food standards. And there was a big pushback against that. And there was a lot of people who I knew at the time were going, we need to get, when they were voting for Brexit, one of the reasons is we want to get out of this situation where we get forced to take these, and the whole thing fell through. I think actually Trump scrapped it when he came in the first time. But of course the UK is now desperate for a trade deal with the US and would take anything that we were told to take because we don't really have any trading partners. But it is always, the US has had way lower food standards and allows more crap in. Are you still doing the carnivore thing?
Not completely, no. We have a fruit farm, as you know, and so I love fruit, and so I'm eating fruit. And I'm eating savory fruits, you could say, and root vegetables. So I'll eat like bell peppers, cucumbers, sweet potatoes, and mostly protein, chicken, steak, and salmon, and eggs, and bacon. I'd say that makes up the large majority of my diet, my calories. And I feel great when I eat that way,
Right.
I'm not
so you've
really
got
eating
quite
any
a lot
grains
of
right now.
fruit
Some
and
rice
veg
here and there. Yeah, quite a lot. Like probably 30%
right.
of my calories are from fruit and veg.
Right.
but I'm not, it's more, definitely more fruit. I would say like, if we're going to say sweet stuff is fruit and savory stuff is vegetable, then I would say it's probably 20-10 sweet to savory, or maybe even like 25-5 of that 30%. But yeah, this feels so good when I eat this way.
Yeah.
I might even feel better if I didn't eat the fruit, but I just, the difference isn't significant enough, and I feel great.
I don't know. I'm kind of like, I sort of did a bit of that carnivore thing. I was eating a lot of meat and eggs and going, I don't really need vegetables.
But you've crashed your metabolism cutting carbs out in the past. So I wonder, did you same thing happen?
I was eating, what I was doing when I was doing that, I was having potatoes for carbs, and I was having onions still, and eggs, and a lot of steak. And I was thinking, this is going to be great. And I was really unwell. And
so what happened? What did you feel?
Well, when you came over to London in the summer, and I was saying to you, I'm not feeling well. I've got my memory's screwed, my energy system's screwed.
So this was before that.
Yeah, up until that point, I've been doing that, and I hadn't felt right since I got COVID last year. Not last year, now the year before, in November 2023. But I was really unwell. I was really struggling to get through. Every time I would have a conversation with someone, it was like I'd have a hangover. I'd have to go lie down. And this went on for months and months and months and months. And then you said to me, when we were in that restaurant, you said, hey, maybe you got low testosterone, because I got some friends who are on TRT and all of this.
Right.
So I thought, okay, well, maybe. And then I went and got a male hormone profile done. It turned out my testosterone was fine, but my estrogen was whacking through the roof.
Wow.
For unknown reasons.
Yeah.
But then I changed my diet, and I started to eat immediately a lot of things that inhibit aromatase, which converts testosterone into estrogen, or estradiol, which is the main form of estrogen that men produce and utilize. And that was just like a miracle cure. It was like
it shifted it.
Jesus Christ had come and laid
the
diet
hands
on me. So the diet shift was pretty easy, actually. So I started having a shot of turmeric and ginger every day, like freshly done with black pepper. But in addition to that, I started eating a lot of cabbage, a lot of broccoli, any cruciferous vegetables. Basically, I was having like a big stir fry laden with cruciferous vegetables, because that dampens aromatase. They've got something in them. Also, I started supplementing with boron. Which boron
is that like on the periodic table? I don't know. Is that like
an
element?
It's an element. Yeah, it's interesting. Chris Williamson of Modern Wisdom.
Yeah.
He had a clip saying he started taking boron or something else, and his testosterone went up like, something
because he needs more.
Yeah, it just went up from being like some.
Holy shit!
It really went through the roof. So I started taking boron and zinc and some supplements and things, but it was literally like a miracle cure. Now, some people might say, well, that's placebo, whatever, but I tried a lot of things to fix this, and none of the others worked. So if I was so susceptible to a placebo, I think one of the many other things I tried would have worked. The way I see it is maybe those vegetables are medicinal, and they're more medicinal than nutritional in some ways, and maybe we need the medicine more because of the world we live in. Because of, like, I don't know why my estradiol's up through the roof, but we do know that testosterone in men has been dropping literally year on year for the last sort of 30 years. And you go, well, why is that? Nobody quite knows why, but it's got to be something environmental, I would think, or lifestyle related.
The food or the circumstances, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So, something's going on.
Right.
So maybe, we need more of these medicines now, plant medicines that we might call vegetables.
Well, there's also just a hollowing out of nutrition in all foods, right? Like, and probably also in the animal foods as well, because, animal meat, because I forget where I heard it. It was somebody speaking about, I hadn't looked this up to find out if it was true. If we had a producer in real time Googling stuff for us, we could validate it, but I'll have to do this in post. But the thing I heard was that 90%, that in American food today, like farmed fruits and vegetables, they only have like 10% of the nutrient value that they did, 50 or 100 years ago. So that's like, then just because the soil is less rich, there's still the object that we call the same food, but if you bite into an apple today, it's like only 10% of the nutritional value that an apple used to have.
Right.
It's also been inflated, to be bigger and more, more sugar in it and less nutrition. And so, we're maybe eating just as much food, but getting less and less nutrition. And so maybe there's more of a need for that.
I believe that's the case, particularly with minerals. I had this book years ago now, about 10 years ago. And it was about magnesium, and it pointed out that most people are magnesium deficient.
Yeah.
And if you look for the foods that people go, this is rich in magnesium, not if it's not grown in soil that's not rich in magnesium. Right?
That's where it comes from.
Yeah, because potentially it could be that this particular vegetable, if it's grown in magnesium-rich soil, will have a good magnesium uptake. But if it's not grown in magnesium-rich soil, then it doesn't have a good uptake. And what it was pointing out in this book is the stuff that they put on the soil, like the fertilizers, like nitrates and this kind of thing, that might help the vegetable grow, but it doesn't replace all the stuff in the soil that would go and make up part of the nutritional profile of that vegetable. It's just helping it to grow. That's all.
Yeah.
So
this is why I've switched my attitude around supplements so much. And I'm just figuring out what my supplement stack is going to be, because I was like, as long as I eat healthy, I don't need supplements. But I was assuming that the healthy food that I was eating had all the nutrients and minerals in it that it has always had. And if I'm eating the food, I'm getting the nutrient minerals. But now that I know I'm eating the food and a lot of it's going to be the hollowed out version of that food, then supplementing the nutrients and minerals is going to help. I mean, I drink Element, that company, LMNT. Too bad I'm not sponsored by them, because I could just say, go to element.com/JP for a discount, but I'm not
maybe
sponsored,
one day you'll be sponsored.
Maybe one day. Yeah. But it's just like magnesium, potassium, and sodium, and like some kind of like NutraSweet or some kind of sweetener. I don't know. It's some xylitol or whatever. And so it's got a sweet taste, chocolate flavor, caramel. And so I drink them in the morning instead of coffee, and that kicks off my day, sometimes at night. But I actually started that during the carnivore diet because I did feel that I was getting a mineral deficiency through not eating. When I was doing that for 2 months and not eating any fruits or vegetables, it was like made a big difference. Yeah. Took away the headaches and the smelly sweat.
The interesting thing for me as a guy who is a brain wrangler or hypnotist or change work practitioner or whatever is if somebody had come to me with a lot of those symptoms that I had, when I looked at the list of symptoms, they also match the symptoms of depression, right? Now, I want to qualify that. That doesn't mean while this was going on, I was there feeling sorry for myself and going, what a hard life I've got, or thinking miserable thoughts. It's just I had the physiological symptoms of depression, not the psychological symptoms of depression necessarily. But if somebody had come in to see me with similar symptoms, I may well have, given my area of kind of specialism and expertise, had a bias towards the mind part of the mind-body system.
Yeah.
But it kind of really had me thinking, wow, how many things do I end up working with people for that are ostensibly more psychological or experiential, but like have correlates in the physiological system, and maybe would be better addressed that way. Like I was reading this morning about a study that demonstrates a link between depression and inflammation in the body. Now, you don't know which way it goes. Maybe when somebody's becomes psychologically depressed, maybe that increases inflammation. Maybe it's the other way around.
I mean, so many carnivore diet stories are of people healing psychological things like depression. So there's, and I know for sure that when I ate strictly meat, even without the fruit, even if I go that far, like my inflammation reduces to a level that I've never experienced before. And it's like information that I just always live with that I don't even really notice because it's such a refrigerator hum background, which is like a little bit of congestion in my nose and a little bit of ache in my joints, like my knees and my elbows, which is like, my story is like everybody's got that in your nose. And of course my joint ache because I'm like 46 and I'm pretty physically active. So I have sore joints. Yeah, that's a true story. But it was completely eradicated when I was eating just purely meat. So my inflammation went to like further down than I ever knew it was possible.
Right.
And that's a thing. So it's like, I'm not at that point right now because I'm happy eating the fruit and I can live with a little bit of stuffiness in my nose, a little bit of joint pain.
You think the fruit like encourages inflammation?
I don't know if it's the fruit or just the glucose or the sugar, fructose, something. I mean, something is different when I'm eating more than just meat in my body.
Right.
Right. And like, I know the more sugar we have in our body, the more water we hold in our body. And that is what inflammation is. And so maybe it's not wrong. It just is what it is. You know, you become you don't hold, that's the other, on carnivore diet, you need to drink a lot more water because you don't have the sugar in your system to hold water. So you dehydrate very fast, very rapidly. And so, you know, it's maybe not, so I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I know that I have that, it has that effect on my body.
I mean, in the end, you're going to have to find, what works for you. I've just started reading this book or listening to this book. I think it's called Balanced Brain. And I just opened up my Audible, I'll be able to see it. I'm just listening to chapter 1 of it, The Balanced Brain. And it's by like a neuropsychologist called Camilla Nord. But I saw in a newspaper article, it was a Guardian article, someone had shared it on Facebook. And just talking about the brain-body system, this is where it mentioned about the depression and inflammation. But I just pattern interrupted myself and I have no idea why I was mentioning this book. But it's a very interesting book, just kind of looking at the whole psychophysiological. I know why I mentioned it. Because in the first chapter, she's talking about mental health and trying to understand, by what criteria we might measure it, what leads to good mental health, what leads to bad mental health. But she's really clear that if you look at effective treatments for anything like depression or whatever, and say, well, this is like got a 55% efficacy rate and that's therefore clinically significant. What that really means is for some people, it did absolutely nothing and may have made them worse. But for other people, it was just miraculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she points out that it's like we're dealing with such a level of complexity that it's impossible to ever say this is what works for anything.
Absolutely.
And the line,
that's where I've come to.
Right. And the line she uses was one person's snake oil is another person's miracle cure.
Hell yeah, dude. That's, I was just sharing with my sister-in-law when I was in Australia, who, we were talking about some health challenges for a member of her family. And I was like, she's a doctor. And I said, you're not going to find a double-blind clinical trial that shows you the right way to eat that's going to create optimal health, because every body is different because of, genetically the circumstances that have led it to its current, whatever provides current homeostasis. And so the only way to create optimal health is to adopt the attitude of an experimenter, and you are the experiment, and you have to just live that way, and you have to try new things, and you have to try things that are seemingly contradictory, and look for the nuance in the overlap of the Venn diagram of where there's truth in the middle. And you got to just stay on that constant cycle of learning and growth. And I find that having that attitude towards all growth, but especially within the context of diet and exercise, my life has been an upward spiral of vitality. I feel better and better and better and better over the years because I have more nuance to what works for my body and what doesn't. And that only comes through experimenting with extremes,
right?
And looking for the new thing that works a little bit better.
Which to me is exactly the same. This is my philosophy of doing change work. My approach is I don't know when I sit down with a client. Somebody wrote to me earlier and said, "Oh, I heard you talking about ADHD in this live call I did on Sunday. Have you worked much with ADHD?" I'm like, "No, I don't work ever with ADHD. I work with human beings, and maybe some have an ADHD diagnosis." But in the end, the way I look at it is by this simple metric: better or worse, right? Better, worse, or the same. Now, when I'm working with a client, I don't have an answer for them. I've got lots of thoughts, lots of ideas, lots of possibilities, lots of ways I can invite them to move their mind in different ways. And I have no idea ahead of time which ones are going to move them into the better category or the worst category. I mean, I say no idea. I've got bets I'll make. I've got a good hunch that this is going to be a good line.
You don't have certainty.
Right. I don't have certainty. But in the end, it's just it's a series of experiments. So what happens when? Boom. I worked with a guy a couple of 3 weeks ago who had PTSD diagnosis and a clear experience. I'm not going to go into the nature of his story, but he had very much a clear trigger for the PTSD, and it was when he thought anything was dirty, he'd get like a response to this, like a horrible response. It went back to a particular traumatic event. I said, so when you think about something, and there was something particularly, he said, for example, the dog's lead, I know I have to clean it because and he started to have this response. He's like,
yeah.
So I said, as you think about that now, how strong is that feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? He said 10. I said, okay, keep your head still, look at my finger. I did a few eye movement passes. Afterwards, I said, so when you think about that now, what happens? And he went, no, nothing. What? Complete cleared through. Now, the next client I had in.
Got to send that guy some eggs.
Right.
See how he does.
See how he does. Next client I had in, she had a structurally similar problem. PTSD, very simple PTSD, very clear originating event. And I'm like, well, I just did this with this guy and it was a miraculous shift.
So this will work.
Yeah, so I'm going in with this, exactly the same, zero difference. None. None whatsoever. Now,
people are different, dude.
Right. Later in the session, I did get a profound shift with her, but by an entirely different means. So like, if you're not willing to kind of go, okay, so let's just try these things, what works? And you've got to have options. You've got to have things to try, which in life, you can take it slow. If you want to sort your body or your brain out, you can try things. You can do a bit more research, whatever. Obviously, if you're doing a change work session, you've got to have a repertoire of good options.
Yeah. Yeah, or the trust to come back and try different things. But experimentation is, it's a path. And, obviously I studied science. And so I kind of was schooled in the scientific method quite hard for like my whole education. But I do think that there's a culture of seeking the one truth that is antithetical to that orientation of experimentation. But the idea that there's one answer for human beings or people for so many things is a frame that's worth liberating yourself from.
Yeah.
And to just trying on the idea that maybe there's a different solution for everything for everybody.
Right.
And so then what? So then I got to experiment.
I really like this from this Camilla Nord because she's like a neuropsychologist or something like this. So she's kind of mainstream academic. I think she's at Cambridge University.
Yeah.
And the fact that she said that, I love that she said one person's snake oil is another person's miracle cure or whatever.
Awesome.
Because you go on my background is NLP. I still love NLP. I've got my criticisms about it. But if you go on the Wikipedia page for NLP, it is absolutely eviscerated on there. NLP is a pseudo-scientific and it just attacks in. And the fact is, well, that's one person's. All the skeptics that are eviscerating it claim to be the scientifically minded, but they're not seeing how these things really work. They're not seeing, that actually this stuff really helps a lot of people. And then there's other people that it doesn't help at all. So why write it off just because you've found this or you found that?
Yeah, it's this attachment to the mean, which has us miss the benefit that lives at the edges. Like you pointed out, or like some people were made worse and some people were made better, and then the average is no change. And so we discount the people that are improved and we don't look for the nuance of what has those improved, which is probably very similar to what has the other persons be worse. Like remember that study? I think what was the guy's name that he wrote 60-second. What's the guy's name? He's
Richard
professor.
Wiseman.
Yeah, Richard Wiseman. He had a thing about research about affirmations and about how they don't just not work, they make people feel worse.
Right.
And I know from the depth of the work that I do in using your speaking and your thinking to create a state of being and a state of mind that can shift your reality, shift your behavior, shift your action, shift your results. I know exactly why it can make you feel worse because I know what it's like to say something new and to feel worse because I said it. And I also know what it's like to say something new and to feel better because I said it. And it lives in the nuance of like what's actually happening at the most subtle level. Am I having conflict within and how am I meeting that conflict? Am I just trying to force through it and making myself feel worse for the counter belief? Or am I meeting that conflict as an opportunity to inquire into and where does that come from? And doing some kind of work of liberation or forgiveness that creates a space and a freedom for then that new idea to live in, actually lifts me up. And in the absence of that nuance, all you see is one thing that if you do that, it makes it worse. Then you walk away from the whole world.
Right. This is the thing with the NLP thing. When I've spoken to people who say NLP's been debunked, right? You go, well, how so? And they always quote this one study that tested something that was never claimed by any of the founders of NLP or the originators of it. It may have been claimed by some shonky NLP trainer trying to flog magic to people, but it's never actually, and the claim that was tested was that you could tell whether people were lying from how they moved their eyes, which is never, it's not part of the NLP system. It's just not there. Now, of course, there's eye accessing cues, which is not about telling whether people are lying or not. So not only did they not test not only did they missed the point and they just didn't test anything that's got anything to do with it. And now it's like, well, that's all done. It's not good. It doesn't work. And you can walk away at that point. I remember Kev Sheldrake saying this, a name that probably nobody will know. Listen to this. He said something like this: the law of attraction, if you're into the law of attraction, just accept you're an idiot, you've been scammed, and something like this. So
it's such a Kev thing to say.
Right. But at the time, he was running this workshop called Practical Mesmerism. And I'm like, Kev, you're running a workshop on mesmerism and saying the law of attraction's been debunked. He's like, yeah, but I don't mean mesmerism, really. It's just a fun term for hypnotism. I'm like, yeah, but nonetheless, you're into hypnotism, but you dismiss the law of attraction. He said, but hypnotism has an evidence base behind it. And I said, only because people looked and did the research, whereas no one's done the research. And you're just dismissing it because the research hasn't been done, right? Now, interesting, going back to Richard Wiseman, another one of his books, which I absolutely think is fantastic, is The Luck Factor.
Fucking love that book too,
right? Because that is basically the luck he's talking about is the manifestation that other people are talking about, but he's got a psychological rendering of how it works.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's it.
I'm sad that I love that book now. In hindsight, I have always loved that book, but I'm sad that I loved it. Can you guess why I'm saying that?
Because it's like trying to make the magical mundane.
Yeah, because it takes the magic out of magic. It shows me how the trick is done, and you can still do the trick and you can still get the result, but there's no more magic.
But it doesn't. It doesn't. This is something.
Yes, it does. Tell me why it doesn't.
All right, I'm going to say it doesn't need to then. Okay. Like this is another thing I got from, say, Richard Hart's book, Hypnotism and the Doctors.
Well, maybe I should explain what the luck factor is too, because people listening don't know what the hell we're talking about.
All right. So do you want to explain or shall I?
No, you can do it.
All right. So the luck factor is Richard Wiseman. He's a research psychologist, and he was curious to do some research into the phenomenon of luck. And he put an advert in the newspaper saying, look, please come and participate in my study if you consider yourself to be either extremely unlucky or extremely lucky. I don't want anyone in between, only the extremes.
Right.
This was the start of his research, but in the end, he ended up doing a lot of various experiments, and he found that he set up this scenario where people would go into a coffee shop and they would bump into someone and have a conversation. This was all set up. The person was an actor. And he set things up like there would be money lying around on the floor and opportunities for all sorts of stuff. And the people that consider themselves really lucky found the money, connected to the opportunities, whatever. The people who consider themselves to be really unlucky just went in, got a coffee, sat there miserable and left. So the basic premise of it is there's an attitude or a mindset that creates more with the world around you, that sees more opportunity, that opens more doors. And he's not like a woo-woo guy or anything like that. He's a mainstream research psychologist, and in that other case, a debunker of something else that you might call mystical. So so I think that book, like I often say, if you're a very rational, analytic minded, materialistic person and you're dismissing the manifestation or the law of attraction, whatever you want to call it, check out Richard Wiseman's book, because it will give you a mechanism by which that can work that has no appeal to vibration or anything like that. But I would say that doesn't mean that that's how it works, right? Now, the reason I mentioned Richard Hart's book, Hypnotism and the Doctors, is because he points out that there are people throughout the 1800s, some believed that this is about suggestion. Some believe that this is about some neurological phenomenon. Some believe that this is about magnetic fluid. Some believe it's about spirit. And like some believe it's about like mind transfer. There's all these different explanations. And his point that Richard Hart makes is he says each one of them is arguing with the other one, thinking that they're right. But Richard Hart's theory is they've all got a bit of it. And they think the bit that they've got is all of it. Right? So it's not like, oh, is it like some vital force? Or is it suggestion?
Right.
Well, what Richard Hart's saying is, I think it's vital force and suggestion. You know, like if you do a magic trick with cards, you might stack a lot of stuff. There might be some self-working principles. There might be some sleight of hand. There might be some misdirection. There might be some psychological framing. There might be, and you're trying to go, which one is it? Well, it's all
what
of
I
these
like
things.
about this. Yeah, what I like about that is the possibility that what if everything's like that? What if we always only, what if whenever we think we've got the whole story, we've just got our hand on a piece of it, enough of it to be useful, but actually there's so much more to why everything is happening the way it's happening. I've got this kind of like, this image of like that everything in this 3 dimensions of in the 4 dimensions, space and time, are like that we see as separate things are like the fingers on the hand of God coming out from beneath the surface of the water into space, and they look separate, but they're all just like parts of the same hand, right? And so not just that things are interconnected, but everything is actually part of one thing.
Right.
Everything is one thing. Everything is one thing, and we just relate to the parts as separate, but like, I'm looking outside of the trees and the birds and and everything, and it's like it's all just expressions of like a single essence. And this is getting quite out there, but I have a probably just past 3 years, probably through psychedelics as well, is like I have a really visceral embodied experience of the world that way, much more than I ever did when I was younger, and much more than I did as a young Christian having a God that was an other, right? Like for me, this experience now is much more like be still and know that I am God, or we are God, and like we are everything. We are that. There is something greater than me, and I am that. Is a kind of closest, I guess, language that I could use to kind of point to that. But yeah,
because I think it shapes consciousness, and that's the thing. I think like your rationalists, let's say, miss this. I get this with Chinese martial arts, particularly the internal martial arts, because traditionally they're based around ideas of qi and energy, and the explanations are all about qi and energy. And a lot of people who are skeptical about that go, well, it's nothing to do with that. It's all just body mechanics, right?
Yeah, yikes.
Now, you can do it on a body mechanics model, but it has a different quality than when you do it if you do it with an energy model.
Yeah.
Right. So now, even whether the energy is real or not, or whether it's just a way of calibrating to your internal alignments, or do you see what I mean? It doesn't kind of matter whether it's real or not, because it's about the experience, and is there value in that way of experientially rendering it? And I see this because I used to be like a atheist rationalist. And to me, when I'd look at the world around me, I was just seeing the surface of a bunch of molecules, and I was basically looking at a dead mechanical world around me. You know, and then when I came to have some certain shifts and things, the world suddenly seemed alive and it felt different. And instead of feeling like being a part of me, apart from me, I was like a part of it. So before I used to see like, well, there's this harsh world around me, and like I'm in it and I have to work against it. And, now it's like, well, I'm a part of this thing. It carries me. I am of it. That's not just like a different idea. That's a different consciousness.
Yeah. It's an animistic consciousness for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, this has been over 2 hours, I think now. So
Yeah. And I haven't even eaten this evening. So
wow.
I'm going
time
to
for
do
dinner
that.
for you. Time for some breakfast for me.
Yeah.
Thank you for appearing on episode 1 of Gatekeepers. We'll have you back at episode 100.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being your guest. By the time episode 100 comes, you'll be stopping halfway through to sell athletic greens to people.
Probably. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Love you, brother.
All right, John.
Take care.
Take care.
See ya.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.